Welcome back to RSBN Live. It's David Schroeder. He is quite the musician, but also an expert on this wealth, security, preservation. What can you do to fight $37 trillion of debt that's out there? And man, this video, FDIC's, the Systemic Resolution Advisory Committee, SRAC, I've actually never heard of them, but it has people like Donald Cohn of the Brookings Institute, Gary Cohn, who was in the first Trump administration. I'm surprised and shocked that they actually filmed themselves discussing what could be the end of paper money, specifically the American dollar. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I think if most people saw that, they'd be very shocked. And this FDIC system that is supposed to give us full faith in our wealth and our assets, it might just come tumbling down.
Yes, it might. So yeah, the video that you're talking about, yes, I've seen that video. That video shows the FDIC board talking about what's called a bank bail-in. And in Cyprus and in other countries over the years, what has happened when banks begin to fail, they need a way to either take the money from the government and make the depositors whole, or now in this case, they did what's called a bank bail-in, like in Cyprus, where they took a large chunk of the depositors' deposits. See, deposits are bank liabilities. Those are liabilities for the bank. That's money that they have to pay back to the depositors. And so this thing that is called a bank bail-in, if banks begin to fail, instead of the government bailing them out, now we, the depositors, lose a portion of our deposits as a way for the bank to make itself whole again.
Wow, that's really something to watch. And I mean, it harkens back to our foundation of a country when the Democrat Party formed. It was against those New England Republicans who wanted to control and seize a centralized power early on in New England. You also had a situation of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists arguing this very point. But as of recent, under the Dodd-Frank Act that was signed by President Obama, perhaps some of the worst legislation that's ever been out there, this bail-in, as you were explaining, David, was finally introduced to the American people. For viewers at home, can you explain how a bail-in would be different from the taxpayer-funded bailouts of 2008 that we saw when then President George W. Bush admittedly abandoned his free enterprise principles to take care of the big ones like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac becoming household names. And I think a lot of middle-class people thought, wow, I just lost all of my assets. Is the government really working on my behalf?
All right. So the difference there between the two. So a bailout is where Congress steps up and says, okay, like with Lehman Brothers, okay, we're going to take X amount of dollars and we're going to give you what you've lost so that you can stay afloat and depositors don't lose their money. Their investors don't lose their money. They don't lose their money on the mortgages and the money that they've lent out to people. They have been made whole by your and my tax dollar. Now, on the flip side, Barack Obama, you said it, he signed into law the Dodd-Frank Act. Under the FDIC resolution, they now can come into a bank and basically say, okay, we're going to take a portion of every depositor's deposits and we're going to turn that into equity. So now you own a piece of a failing bank. So let's say you've got $100,000 in your account. They take $30,000 and they do that from every depositor, whatever amount that percentage is. They take that from the depositors, they give that to the bank and makes the bank whole. And now you have shares in the bank. You're a part owner of that bank now. So a bailout means the government takes your tax dollars and gives your money to the bank to make them whole. In a bail-in, the FDIC takes a portion of your deposits and gives it to the bank and makes them whole that way. And now you are a owner in the bank. But now on the flip side, if you lose up to $250,000 in the bank, you still have FDIC insurance. Now, there are a lot of depositors that have a lot of bank accounts that have a lot more than $250,000 in the bank. So you might get bailed in and become a partial owner of the bank, but now the FDIC is on the hook for covering whatever you lose, whatever you don't get. Now, under Barack Obama, he had 495 banks collapse. That's a whole lot of banks during his tenure. Juxtapose that to Donald Trump, the continued fallout from the 2008 debacle with that whole mortgage loss. He only had 16 banks collapse. Now, Biden had 9 banks collapse under his tenure. Of those 9, 3 were the largest of 4 of the largest bank losses in U.S. history. He had 3 of those under his tenure. What's that bank's name? It was right on the tip of my tongue. I just lost the bank's name. Sorry, but they suffered huge losses, right? So if all of this debt that we have, this $37 trillion of debt, we're already teetering. We've got banks, central banks around the world that have more gold in their accounts than they do U.S. Treasury bonds. And that's only happened once in the history since we were taken off the gold standard, and that was in 1996. So now we have all of this debt. We're adding $1 trillion every 100 days to that debt. What happens when that debt begins to crumble and fall? Well, mortgages, commercial leases and loans, credit card debt, all of that will then begin to falter. And so when these banks begin to fail, all right, well, the FDIC has approximately $137 billion in the account to cover for FDIC losses. Well, there is $17 to $19 trillion in depositors who have deposited money into bank accounts. Now, if all these losses begin to add up, crypto's not covered. If you've got a stable coin or any of these other cryptocurrencies, those are not insured. Your stocks are not insured. Your mega funds, these are not insured. It's only the deposits up to 250,000 in the bank that are actually covered. What happens when that 137 billion runs out at the FDIC? What happens to the rest of the depositors' money? What happens? You can't go to the bank and there won't be a run on the bank because they've got no money to give out because it's already been given out. So that's a huge thing that's sitting in the background just waiting to happen. That debt is waiting to happen. Nations and countries don't believe America can service its debt anymore, and they're getting fearful. So now they're loading up on gold and they're dumping U.S. treasuries or treasury bonds.
It's a frightening scenario, and some critics saying that these bail-ins put depositors' money at risk since the regulations and regulators can convert deposits or bonds into bank equity during this crisis. So is that a real threat to the average Americans with money in the bank? But if there's no money left over, what's someone to do, David?
Well, there really is one way to protect yourself. We've talked about it a multitude times of all the various scenarios of things that are going on in the world right now, like with BRICS, with the debt. There's so many things that are going on worldwide. If banks were to collapse and the FDIC could not cover all of that 17 to 19 trillion in deposits in the bank, the only way you can protect yourself is literally to take some of your paper assets, your money, your stocks, bonds, and to take your portfolio and to diversify it into some precious metals, such as gold or silver. You see, if a bank collapses and there's no more FDIC money or insurance to cover you, you lose all of your deposits. Let's say you've got 30 or 40% of that in gold. Let's say you've got $250,000 in the bank and there's no more money from the FDIC to cover you. Well, what if you had 35% or 40% in gold? Well, guess what? You're still standing. You haven't been wiped out. And all we have to do is look back to the 1920s during the Great Depression and see what it looked like for investors back then and for mom and pop savers like me who are saving for our future get totally wiped out and they have nothing left. What happened? They lost their homes, they lost their cars, they lost their buggies and carriages, they lost their businesses, they lost their clubs, they lost everything. And all you have to do is just look at the photos from that era and see how long those bread line and soup lines were for people waiting in line to get a government handout in the form of a meal, right? So really the best way to protect yourself is to literally take some of your money and start putting it into precious metals like gold and silver. And, you know, it's been all over the news right now that gold and silver are in a crazy bull market. Gold is over 3,800. I think it was 3,860 this morning. $3,800. I mean, just think about this. Just a couple years ago, it was at $1,600. That's it's doubled. Silver has been hovering between $22 and $24 for well over a decade, if not 2 decades. And now look at it. It's $46 an ounce. Both of these metals are in a bull market. But here's the truth, Robert. Gold really is not going up in value. What you're seeing is the decline of the value of the dollar. You're seeing that the decline of the dollar cannot purchase as much as it used to be able to purchase. So really, gold isn't going up. It's the value of the dollar is going down. And we talked about it, you know, a couple of weeks ago that Bank of America came out and said that the dollar is in a crisis on the verge of collapse. We've lost 10.7% of its value just since January 1st of 2025. So I'm not trying to paint a scary scenario. I'm just giving out the facts. This is what the world looks like for the United States of America right now.
And President Trump has commented on this as early as this summer with the reduction of the value of the dollar. It can actually benefit the economy as a whole. Is there a way you can explain that for our viewers, that the United States can actually leverage itself in a better position for the middle class with a weak dollar?
I struggle to find the answer for that question because when I look at a devalued dollar, I see that other currencies that are competing against the US dollar, gold is a better value for them and they can purchase more gold than we can with our dollar. A devalued dollar for me means loss in every, you know, I'm not an economist, so I can't really go into great depth to answer that particular question. I know Trump says that a devalued dollar will be better for our economy in the short term, but I'm not looking in the short term. I'm looking at the long term. You know, I look at $37 trillion of debt. We're going to hit, you know, 38 here pretty soon. And I'm looking at my children. I've got 6 children, and then I've already got 2 grandchildren, and I'm looking at their future. What does their future look like? You know, a devalued dollar just means that they're not going to be able to buy as much, and it's not going to go as far as it could if we had a powerfully valued dollar. So that's kind of how I look at that question. You know, I don't see it being good for me. But, you know, the economists might be able to answer that question in a better way.
Now, if the bank failures are back in the headlines, as we've seen from this past year, even 2 major ones failing, what steps should everyday Americans take to financially secure their assets, specifically protecting their savings with precious metals like gold and silver, especially from monetary wealth?
Right. So that's the answer right there. The answer is taking some of your paper assets, taking some of your cash, and literally start hoarding gold, start hoarding silver, palladium and platinum as well. You know, those are other metals that you can also use to protect yourself. So what gold does is it's a hedge, right? It's a protection mechanism that helps you to not lose everything. So, you know, there's only been 2 banks this year. That's fantastic, but that's 2 banks too many. If more banks begin to falter, which I believe they will within the next 5 years, I'm looking at a lot of banks right now who are not able to withstand the FDIC pressure tests that are put on them when they have to be tested to see how all of the rules and regulations that they are run by, how the reserves are, what do they have in reserve. What's crazy is, you only have to have, if you know what a reserve is, it means they only have to have 10% in reserve for, like, they only have to have, for every dollar that they want to spend, they only have to have 10 cents in an account to support their reserves. So they look at these things, they do all this pressure testing on each one of these banks, and a lot of these banks are coming up short. And so they're given, like 90 days to resolve those issues before the next test. So you already gave us the answer. Buy gold, buy silver, and I'm going to say hoard it. Don't put it underneath your mattress. Put it in a safe and bury the safe, and keep adding safes. Bury your safe all over your property, whatever you've got to do, but hoard your cash. I don't even trust bank safe deposit box anymore, because, a bank can just go in and raid those things. If everything goes to calamity, all right, if there's no FDIC money, well, let's go take whatever other assets we have from our depositors. Let's take their assets. Now, could that happen? It could. Would it happen? I don't know, because we've never been in a situation where, as Robert Kiyosaki says, the everything bubble collapses. And if that day comes, those who are holding cash are going to be in a tough position.
No, definitely a scary thing. So as you sit here,
Yeah.
David, speaking on these very vital issues, do you see down the road a possibility, at least, of another Great Depression, and almost 100 years later, mirroring what took place in the early 20th century with bread lines and people who did not see that coming really suffering the consequences?
I have shared this with my wife. I have shared this with my kids. I believe, what is this? This is 2025. Listen to me, 19. I'm thinking of already in the 20th century. 2025, I think within the next 20 years, this is my own personal belief. This is my prediction that in the next 20 years, we are going to see a bank failure worse than we saw in the Great Depression. I think we're going to see bank failures like we've never witnessed before. 495 under Barack Obama, I think, will be a drop in the bucket. I think we're going to see the stock market crash. I think we're going to see money dry up. I think we're going to see nearly all banks crash. I don't think the Federal Reserve is going to be able to print enough to keep us afloat. As we saw in Myanmar many years ago, when they had their great inflation issue, people had wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. I see that kind of crash in the next 20 years. That's my personal belief. I think the Robert Kiyosaki bubble, everything bubble that he talks about, I believe that that's going to happen in the next 20 years. So I'd say stock up on your gold, hoard it, don't spend it, don't use it for anything, just hoard it. But that's my prediction. That's what I feel is coming.
And I think that's good advice, David, because watching this video from the FDIC and this SRAC committee talking about all this, it almost gives an eerie feeling from something like a James Bond film of yesteryear, of the big bad guys getting together to plot global control. And a lot of it is being talked about with a one world global currency, a digital currency. So it's not just crypto for us traders who are, having some fun on the side, diversifying our own assets. It's these individuals saying we will regulate all of it under one digital fold. And I mean, they're openly discussing it, filming themselves.
Did you see earlier this week, the UK just came out and said that there is now a mandatory digital ID, right? So if you live in the UK, you are now required to step up, get your pictures taken, front, side, both sides, underneath, top. They take your entire facial thing so that they can mark out everything. So if you don't support what the government says, they know who you are, they know where you are, they know how to find you. And if you pop up somewhere else when they're looking for you, ding. So that it's already moving in that direction. We can see that digital ID is going to eventually turn into a digital currency. So again, more scary things on the world stage.
And this is not discussion of a tinfoil hat by any means, because Nigel Farage was against this, and Germany instituted it as the first in Germany to counter the so-called migrant crisis, which was happening because of their government. But as Nigel said, who runs the Reform Party in UK, it did nothing to solve that problem. This is more of a Big Brother situation. And another funny story, David, before we part, I was going through Hartsfield-Jackson, and most people, I'm sure, that travel on a regular basis, noticing, and their signs, thanks be to our foundational principles and our Bill of Rights, you can opt out of that picture. So as I'm handing this to TSA and going through the clear line, and you do so many, you have to scan your eyes to all of that. I just hand my ID over, and the gentleman said, "What does it matter? You're on camera all throughout this airport." And I said, as long as I have an option to get out of this camera where I do not know where it's going, that is potentially, an unconstitutional surveillance. I don't know where this is going to. I'm going to choose to give you my government issued ID that already exists. I'll take a moment of slight discomfort to pull it out of my wallet, but I just think it's, I'm trying to get this information out there to the American people, like you are, to have diversified assets and also to think on a daily basis, because it's been going to the wayside ever since the last few years.
Yep, that is true. It is true. So just open up our eyes and pay attention. That's all I can say, is pay attention to what's going on in the world around you.
Well, David Schroeder, we're always happy to have your expertise from Monetary Wealth, the best in the business. I believe it's rsbnforthegold.com to see where you can find all of your great options. You get a complimentary presidential gold guide as well with President Trump on the front.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a thing right now also, if you would like to speak to somebody, if you have concerns, about what's going on in the world, what's going on with the dollar, on the devaluing of the dollar, if you have, $50,000 is not a lot of money, but it's a lot to lose. If you've got that much money sitting in the bank, take 20 of it and diversify. Put some of that into gold or silver. Don't wait, because you could wake up tomorrow. How many times have we woken up just in the last 20 years to hear that the stock market has plunged, 10%, right? So I would say do that. Call us or fill out the form, and we'll call you. But share with us, what are your concerns? What are you most fearful of? What are you worried about? And we'll help you come up with a game plan. No two game plans are the same. The reason why you save is completely different from the reason why I save. I would like to leave something for my grandkids and my great-grandkids if I can. You might, I don't know a lot about your life, but you might just want to be saving for your retirement. Right? So there's two different game plans right there. Some people want to buy low and sell high. That's another option. But no two game plans are the same. So I would say, get on the phone or fill out the form, and we'll call you. Share with us what you are, what your biggest fears are, and let us help you figure out a game plan to overcome those fears, so that when you go to bed at night, you don't go to bed with fear. And when you wake up in the morning and see that the world has crashed, you're like, oh, okay, I'm okay. So that's what I would say.
And then in turn, you can help others as well. God forbid we have a calamity with failing banks, because history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it does rhyme. And I think even in this year alone, we've recognized, as we come towards the end of 2025, surprises and violence, and we always think on the other end, as more of a reactionary society, this too shall pass, which it will. And it's always good to put a higher belief in a higher power. At the same time, being prepared is always the best way to go, instead of being too late, like Mr. Jerome Powell. We don't want that. So David Schroeder, always a pleasure to have you at Right Side Broadcasting Network to share your expertise and how our viewers can diversify and prepare wealth, security, pensions, retirement, everything they worked hard for, not only for themselves, but for their posterity and generations to come.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert. You have a good one. Take care.